it's a lot of work to do the content that you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
And stay committed and keep doing it. At what point did you just decide, I'm doing this?
I wasn't comfortable with basically almost anyone in my day-to-day life having those conversations and felt very alone, and started gradually sharing more and connecting with more people, but called out the dance world for standards it promotes as far as eating disorders, body image, all of that.
You weren't in a place where you felt comfortable talking in real life with people in your life about what was going on with you, but you felt comfortable with followers, whoever decided to join in the conversation.
Yeah.
You felt like a safe space there to be able to express yourself and what you needed to with your feelings.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. And you know, it's interesting because in older generations, A, they wouldn't get it. B, they would be like, oh, how sad. She didn't, you know, whatever. At the end of the day, you know, we look at this from a therapeutic perspective. When someone's going through something, the goal is to move them towards connection of any sort, healthy connection, and being able to express and not hold in. Hello and welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. I'm Patrick Custer, your host, and as always, I'm so excited to be here. And I have to say, we already started this podcast without you, and
in true ADHD people fashion.
Yes, so buckle up. This is going to be one of those, you know, when I say buckle up, I mean it. And I think that you've convinced me today. I really I need this like chaotic energy. I need it. I think that it makes for the best episodes and best interviews. So I don't know how to screen for that when we're, you know, like talking to people about coming on the show, but
like, are you chaos?
Right. It's like, I always say like, okay, let's dive in. And when I'm picturing it, cause I'll picture what I'm talking about as I say it, like a metaphor, I'm like thinking about like diving into a pool with no, like that hasn't been, it's, you know, crystal. We're about to dive into a wave pool right now. That's how I feel. So, and I love it. Like, I love it. So buckle up or grab a raft because we're jumping in. My guest, therapist, Colleen Warner.
Well, actually Conklin. I just got married, so now it's changed.
Did you tell Instagram?
So with Instagram, it's annoying because I'm like old way of being verified, not the like meta verified paying way, and you can't change your username.
What?
Yeah, like you can change your name, but you can't change your username. I've like talked to like every possible person and it sucks. It's so annoying.
Wow.
Like I was able to change it on TikTok and all the things. And it's so annoying that they like, and when I like reach out, they're like, we'll like send it to our team as a suggestion for whatever. I'm like, surely I'm not the only person that
I know what that is.
Well, and also there are people on the internet who apparently can do it if you pay them like thousands of dollars.
Do you know who any of them are? Because I want at Patrick Custer. Mine has an underscore. The person who, if you're watching or listening at Patrick Custer, you know you don't use your handle and you haven't since 2018. I would like it, please. But no, apparently it's not illegal. It's against the rules and you could get...
Oh, to like sell usernames and all that. Yeah.
And then how do you
But there's a whole wealth of people out there who... Well, that's the thing too. Like, because I was like, it's very much not in my budget to even be like, hey, person, here's $10,000 to do this. But also like, you don't know. Because even if someone's like, here's this portfolio of whatever I did. But it's just so wild.
Well, because it's like not like you would have I guess, legal recourse if it was allowed, but it's not quote unquote allowable. So like they could just be like,
but it was like the same thing.
What,
back
$10,000?
Yeah, like back before the meta verified thing, you could pay people to get you at like the legacy verification. Like me, it was for like over a year. I was like every month sending them, here's all of my things that are why I should be verified. But there are people like,
when you say you were sending them, you mean you were sending Meta.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I was sending.
I just wanted people to understand.
Wasn't sending the internet people, but there are people on the internet where if you have enough money, you can apparently get your like, cause with the legacy verification, cause it's so annoying. Cause that you can't like, if you pay for like, cause I was like, oh, maybe even if I like pay for the meta verified for a month because you can actually like talk to their support people. But no, there's apparently like no way unless, and like, I still don't even know if I trust those people that are charging that amount of money, but apparently if you have enough money, you can do that. Just like the same thing with the like selling and like buying usernames and whatever. But it's so annoying because I'm like, cool, great. Like I'm able to have like my actual like name on there, but not my username. So it's annoying that I have to have like the both thing because I also because I like changed my email and all of that, but now it's like, I don't know, it's a whole thing.
Oh my gosh, a whole thing. So all right, so if you want to find Colleen on Instagram, you can search at Colleen M Werner.
Yes.
WERNER. But that's not her real name anymore. It is, what is the last name again?
Conklin.
Conklin.
Yeah.
Conklin. Okay. God, I got to get that straight in my brain. All right. So
it's hard enough for me to do it too. So
yes, we live in the same town. We followed each other for such a long time. You make amazing content and stuff. A lot of people agree.
Thank you.
Really great content that I think is changing people's perspectives, causing healthy conversation, people to probably ask themselves questions that they wouldn't have otherwise asked themselves. And my gosh, in a day and age when we talk about how negative social media is, like, I think that when you say social media and bring it up, if you were to just say the term to a group of people, I think the first thing that everybody comes to mind is I do too much. It's problematic. It's da 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 da. All these things. You don't think about the positive stuff that people are doing. You straight get the negative. And so anyway, I love what you're doing on your platform because it's a tool, right? Like, and people can use it, abuse it, all the things, but you're using it to champion so many wonderful themes. And I like, before we get into your life story, I just want to ask you, what made you decide that you wanted to, because it's a lot of work to do the content that you're doing and stay committed and keep doing it. Definitely. What made you, when did you dive in? And at what point did you just decide, I'm doing this?
Yeah. So, I mean, in some ways I fell into it because I'm 27, almost 28. And so most of my like growing up, like computers, everything were a thing. And social media, I mean, I was probably, I think in middle school, maybe when Facebook came out, and the same when Instagram first came out, to the point of like, it was back when Instagram, like I didn't even realize that you were like sharing it to other people, like back when I was in middle school, and I thought you were just like putting filters on your photos and didn't realize, like it was like, oh cool, now I have these filters. But it was back when it like first started, and so I had like, you know, regular like personal accounts, whatever. And of course we'll get into this later, but grew up dancing as well, and so was, in addition to just posting whatever teenagers post on Instagram back in that time, posted a lot of like dance photos and stuff too. And I had started doing some dancewear modeling as well. So I was posting some of that stuff, and that was a different account than what I have now. And I really started doing a lot of that when I was like 16, 17. And then started doing more of that. That was also part of what led to my eating disorder, which we will get into later as well. But it was kind of what brought me to doing the like realm of social media I do now. Was back in 2016 was when I started my eating disorder recovery. And part of that was I had been seeing a bunch of recovery focused Instagram accounts, including like both like people who are in recovery, but also different nonprofits like Project Heal, NITA, things like that. And I started very much like, my account was never private, but I didn't have people in my day-to-day life following it, and just like very surface level started being like, I started therapy and whatever. Mostly was just looking to connect with people because I wasn't comfortable with basically almost anyone in my day-to-day life having those conversations, and felt very alone, and started gradually sharing more and connecting with more people But then, and it was kind of, I was sharing more mental health stuff than dance stuff, but was still sharing, like I was sharing, because I still had 2 accounts at that time where I was sharing basically like dance and like regular person stuff on the one account, and then had this account that was the like mental health recovery stuff. But then I started gaining some followers, but still was like pretty small. But back in 2017, and I think I had maybe 1,000 followers at the time. And I was a sophomore in college, and I made a post calling out the dance world because, and I'm sure we'll get into my dance background, but at the time I was a dance major in college and was doing some professional stuff too, but called out the dance world for like standards it promotes as far as eating disorders, body image, all of that. And I hoped that it would be received well, hoped like people would see it, but didn't anticipate that it ended up going viral, and basically like very quickly within a span of a few weeks went to like 10K followers, and was getting connected to a bunch of different nonprofits. And then someone from Yahoo had emailed me and was like, hey, like I'm doing an article on your post, like would love if you can give me like some photos, some quotes. And at that time I still was like, oh cool, she's doing an article, but like nothing's going to like come of that, whatever. And then they ended up making a video of quotes from the article, photos of me that they then shared on all of their social media platforms globally, and it like took off and blew up even more. And so then I was still very early in my recovery at that point, because I only started recovery in like fall of 2016, and that was like spring of 2017. But then got connected with NEDA, the National Eating Disorders Association, Project Heal, another eating disorders nonprofit, and started doing some advocacy stuff with them, and started sharing my story more publicly. And also at that point was kind of transitioning into basically only having the one account, because it just made more sense to like have my like more of my life there. And also because at that point, because again, like that account had never been private, the one with my mental health stuff, but before that, there weren't many people from my day-to-day life following up. At that point, it was like, okay, all these people have seen it. Like everybody knows. So it's not like, oh, here's this thing that I haven't, like that I'm not talking to people about. And I still wasn't talking, like even with my family, wasn't talking to them about like
so
with a ton.
What I think is so interesting that you said, and correct me if I'm wrong about how I heard this, but that you weren't in a place where you felt comfortable talking in real life with people in your life about what was going on with you, but you felt comfortable engaging with content with followers, whoever decided to join in the conversation. Yeah. You felt like a safe space there to be able to express yourself and what you needed to with your feelings. Yeah. I think that's really cool. And you know, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of people in older generations would be, A, they wouldn't get it. B, they would be like, oh, how sad. She didn't, you know, whatever. But at the end of the day, you know, when we look at this from a therapeutic perspective, when someone's going through something, the goal is to move them towards connection of any sort, healthy connection, and being able to express and not hold in. Right? Yeah. And I just think that it's really unique and special how that took place for you. And also that it was like, what a beautiful, and I don't want to say accident, but because I think you just took one opportunity in front of the other to answer whatever call was being, you know, and accident kind of sounds like you didn't do the work, because you definitely did the work. Right. But
very much was this kind of happenstance thing that I definitely was not, even though I was doing, like, even though I had been doing modeling stuff and whatever, it wasn't that I saw and like I was posting on social media, but didn't see it being like, oh, I'm going to be a content creator or whatever. Cause I think also at that time in like 2016, 2017, like being an influencer was a very new thing too.
A new and judged thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure many people still judge influencers, but like it was definitely, you know, like it was just a different age. And so I think that there's something already that I hear in your story that like you showed up with such a level of, vulnerability that brought you to where you are. And that's, I think, what probably your followers are really connecting with, not someone who was seeking to get a lot of eyes on them. And that's beautiful. It's beautiful because I want to relate to people, even if they're not people I know, if they're people I choose to follow. For the most part, I follow some people I zone out about that are just like, whatever. But, that lasting content that, it goes back to that whole thing.
I think it's like the social part of social media too, that connection part that I think does get lost a lot.
Indeed. Well, before we get too lost because of how ADHD, well, you have the H, I don't. But I could use a little bit of the H, but I'm definitely got the ADD. So tell me a little bit about, you talked about your eating disorder. Let's just, if you could tell me really quick, what is it that you now know that you, from a mental health perspective, that you're healing from and that you deal with every day? And then let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah. No, I think it is so interesting. And I feel like I've been really reflective, especially with just getting married recently, like looking at how like my life like trajectory has been in all of these things. And I think now as a therapist and also just as a like older, wiser human, I think, and I feel like I view my clients and so many other people in this way as well, but it was very much something where I was trying to protect myself from so many different things. And it was this combination of, for sure, societal factors, but also trauma and all these different things. And so I feel like I just have so much compassion for my younger self. It's also really hard because there are so many times where I'm like, oh shit, there are like so many years of my life that were lost, so many like memories I don't have and things like that. But just very much always looking at it in this, like how I was trying to, like the ways that I was trying to have it serve me, even if it wasn't truly doing that at its core. But people don't just like have eating disorders for no reason. People don't engage in those behaviors, or with any other sort of mental health condition, whether it's addiction or something else. Like, we don't just do these things for no reason. Even if sometimes other people from the outside can be like, oh, that's vain, or like, oh, you just need to do whatever. But for me now, I'm like, oh, I was trying to protect myself. And like, while I wish I could go back and like protect my younger self from those things, or even make those things that I was trying to cope with not happen. Seeing that. And I think it's also just really interesting seeing like in my family, like so many families, there's a lot of mental health stuff and like genetically there's a lot there. So looking at that and seeing like there are so many reasons why this could have unfolded in this way. But I think just, that compassion is the biggest part, especially because I know early in recovery it was, and even now there are things that are hard, but I feel like there are so many times where I was so hard on myself, or being like, why can't you just stop doing this? Or like, what's wrong with you? So I think that's the biggest thing for me now, having that and just looking at it in the context of what it was, for sure.
Can you take me back to your earliest memory of being a happy, was there a time, because not for everybody, but was there a time as a child that you were happy, carefree, and just full of joy?
Yeah. So I feel like when I was super young, there was a lot of that, like definitely like, I would say maybe before like the age of 8-ish, that I very much like, I remember being very happy. And also when I see pictures and things now, and of course, like pictures can lie too,
Yeah.
but
How would you describe your life then?
Yeah, that was like, I was very happy at the time. My parents were still together. I was the baby of the family. I was dancing, but was very much just doing it for fun. I loved reading, like was very much just like wasn't caring about that. I loved school, did well in school. So, and like had a lot of friends. So it was just like felt very easy then.
Yeah. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York.
Where did your accent go?
It'll come out sometimes.
Okay.
I feel like there are a few words, like specifically I grew up on Long Island, and that's one of the words I say in that way. So there are some things that come out, but yeah, for whatever reason, I don't have. My dad has the epitome of, like, he's from the Bronx, and he has the epitome of a New York accent.
Can you do an impression of him?
I'm trying to think of how would I even do that.
He's your dad. Come on.
Let me think. From the Bronx, like that. But he is also, he's so funny. He also has a lot of like Sylvester Stallone mannerisms, which is interesting. Actually, like at my wedding, before my dance with him, we played the Rocky theme song. Because he's just like, that's all that. But he's, so he has that. And I feel like.
Rocky's my partner's favorite movie.
Like that's like a family thing that we have, like, the amount of, because it was also my brother's thing that like I've seen like all of them, and then also like the like Creed movies and all that. That was like huge part of childhood. Yeah, for sure.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I'm not even from New York, and I can do Jewish New York grandmother who smoked for too many years very well, in my opinion. Thank you very much. Was that good?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it is one of those things where there sometimes are stereotypes that exist for a reason. Believe me, not everyone does, but there are people who very much, that is like people growing up like friends' parents and things. So there are people who do actually sound like that.
So I feel like I can do, the two accents I can do are that and just like a really crappy like British person.
How about Southern? Because are you from here?
I'm from here.
Okay.
So yeah, I can do Southern. I guess I don't really think about that because it like...
Because you're from here, but I wouldn't gather that, at least from like your voice.
It's because I work really hard at covering it up.
Fair.
That's some deep-rooted like, not self-hatred, but just, I don't know, at a young age, I remember getting the message of like, people with more of a Southern accent are less respected than people that don't have one. And now I don't believe that should be true today, but I'm just being honest about my experience of what social cues I got, you know? And so it's so ingrained for me that like,
definitely.
But you know what? I get around somebody with a Southern accent, it comes out and it might stick for days.
Oh yeah, no, that's like, I feel like when, cause my mom doesn't have by any means as thick of a like New York or Long Island accent as my dad, but like my mom definitely has one. And when we're together, I feel like cause we're just very similar people. And, but whenever I'm talking to her, I feel like and it's so interesting how it'll come out in different contexts that it's not necessarily with everyone, but the amount of times like when she's visiting or something and like when she leaves, I'm like, wait, I'm like, I am saying that in such a New York way that I wasn't even
I think it's when, I don't know about you, but it's when I then am around other people that are in my regular daily life that even before they'll say something, I realize that I'm communicating that I'm like, I'm talking to them completely different than they're used to hearing me. And, but you know, whatever. Yeah. So is life. So back to you. What would you say is your earliest memory of things going, I don't want to say bad because, you know, we all have bad days. We all have stuff that we don't like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's part of life. But when did you start feeling things that caused you want to find medicating behavior?
Yeah. So I think the earliest memory I have, especially related to eating disorder stuff, was when I was 8 years old. I went to like my annual physical at my doctor. And after I got off the scale, he told me I needed to eat more salads. And which is just something like now thinking about, like, I'm like, I would never tell a child that.
Right.
Like, and it also was something where, which I think goes to show how for so much for kids and for adults, like he didn't ask my mom like, oh, like, what does her like diet look like? Do you have any issues with getting her to eat vegetables? Like, does she eat varied things? Is she eating enough or whatever? And I, as a kid, had like my parents didn't have any issues with me with food. Like I very much like loved, like I was ironically was not a salad person, but very much loved vegetables, like always, like honestly, like didn't love a lot of like sweet things, like was very much like liked a lot of different foods and they didn't have any issues with that. And even before that, my mom and I have talked about this a lot as an adult now, that she hadn't had, even though I was maybe in a slightly larger body than some friends, but really was not anything like significant. And also body size and health is a whole other conversation too. But she said before that, she's a nurse, and she said before that she hadn't had any concerns about me, my body, my weight, food. And after that, she was then concerned because she's like, oh, this doctor who's supposed to be someone like that is giving us this information that we're supposed to trust. And so she started having more anxiety around it. And like so many people, she had her own struggles with food and body image. And like thinking about it, like, I don't know if consciously then how much of it registered, but it's definitely something that like I very much like hold strong, having that memory. And like the first time I remember doing anything disordered with food was when I was 10. There was a Weight Watchers book that my mom had in the living room that I think actually my grandma might have brought or something, but had like all the different point counts and everything. And I was super independent as a kid. My parents both worked a lot. And so there was a lot of time, like, not that I was like home alone all the time or like didn't have supervision by any means, but I was super independent and also learned how to read. Like I started reading when I was 3. So like had a very high reading level and was just like always interested in all those things and saw that and was like, saw it had all the different point counts for all the foods and was like, like maybe this is like, and I already had some amount of perception of my body being slightly different than other people around me. And of course, like all of the things in like magazines and on TV around food and weight and all that. But I was like, maybe this is something that I should like look at and whatever. And I remember that morning and I can very much picture this, that took like a measuring cup and like measured like my cereal and like measured the amount of milk I was having with my cereal. And definitely like for any human was not enough food, but especially for like a 10-year-old growing child who was super active and all of that. And then continued like, and it was also to the point where there wasn't even like understandably, I mean, given obviously there's a whole thing as far as like different things with kids and weight now, but it was something where like even within that book there wasn't even like recommendations for like, oh, a 10-year-old should be having XYZ amount of points, but I was like, oh, well, like this is here, so clearly this is like okay for me to do. And that was something where I think it was like at that age things were kind of on and off, but I remember there was definitely like a week of that time when we were like going to some family member's house to like have pizza or something. And I remember like looking at how many points that was and things like that, which is just so wild to think of it now, like thinking of like 10-year-olds, especially because I don't work really a lot with kids as a therapist, but I've worked with as young as 11 and thinking about like when I work with like, or even like I used to be a dance teacher and like taught that young, I was like thinking about like a 10-year-old having like thinking about that is just like so wild to me.
Yeah. So what happened next with your thought life and how you, because I know how this is part of my history as well. It snowballs.
Yeah.
How did that manifest for you? Yeah.
So around 12-ish, I started getting more serious about dance. That like I had been doing dance super, super recreationally at like the most like basic level dance studio you could be at. It was very much for fun. Like my mom didn't, not that she didn't want me to become serious, but she didn't want to push me because one of her cousins was on the pre-professional ballet track and quit when she was 18 because her mom forced her to do it and she hated it and she always wanted me to love it. But I had some friends I went to school with that did competitive dance and stuff like that. And I was also like, it was very much the era of when YouTube was first starting and I was spending hours like watching dance videos and whatever. And so
Pause. Do you ever wish that you got started making content in the beginning of YouTube?
Honestly, a lot of times I do.
Right. I cry about it. Not really, but like.
No, sometimes when I see it now, I'm like.
When YouTube came out, I was like, dumb, never gonna.
Yeah, but
never
now I
succeed.
see it and I'm like, oh, but like how people have
the
like.
kid who opens toys and makes like $15 million.
Oh yeah, exactly.
A year.
And I'm like great.
Yeah. I mean, good for them. I really am happy for those people.
But why couldn't have that been me?
Yeah. Sorry, ADD.
You know.
Yep. So continue if you remember where you're at.
Let's see, where was I?
Well, we're talking about
dance, getting more serious about dance. Yeah. And so I was at that point like changed dance studios to a more serious studio. And at that point, I noticed that was a time where I really remember acutely seeing more the differences in my body. And again, like.
Did you really enjoy dance?
Oh yeah. No, I loved it. It was like I started taking dance classes when I was 3, but had been dancing around my house and like I have pictures of this one particular picture that I actually used as one of our like photos as part of our wedding decor. It's of me wearing a pool cover up with a tutu from like Walmart or something with like little like armbands and the like very like cheap shiny ballet shoes, like using my guardrail as a ballet bar when I was like 2.
Yeah.
So I loved it. And I even like when I was getting serious about it, I loved it. And it wasn't something that like, of course, like my parents were supportive of it, but it wasn't something that they at all pushed. But I was taking like significantly more hours of class. And also it was an environment where like the studio I had been at before, like aside from being able to like move in your clothing, like we didn't have a dress code, but I was getting into like taking true ballet classes and things. So I was in a leotard and tights and looking in the mirror for hours a day. And also because at that point I was like very behind in terms of my level of technique because I had been at a super recreational studio. I was also dancing with dancers who were younger than me. So that's a whole other thing too, because I was like 12 or 13, but was dancing with kids who were like 10 or 11 years old. So also at that point, like body development is going to be different. But of course, when you're that young, you're not necessarily going to be thinking of that. But that I saw that largely most of the dancers around me were very thin. And I was not. And so with that, that's kind of when more of the restrictions started playing a role. And so with that, and especially, like also when I had gone as a like studio trip, we went to see New York City Ballet. And I remember being like, oh, there's like no one who looks like me. And I think that combined with I've always been very perfectionistic. I think especially because I like from a young age did really, really well in school and all of that, that was just something that like people also like praised me for being good at so many things. So I always wanted to be the best at whatever. And it felt like, oh, for me to be the best, like I'm already behind in terms of technique and stuff. So I need to like look the part. And also because there are like, I feel like there are definitely times that things were mentioned by dance teachers and things like that. And of course, again, my mom struggling with her body, that there were times we would like diet together and things like that. And also like, it's stuff that we've done so much work together around that I don't blame her for that. But because it's just so normalized. But it started snowballing more with that. And then also I feel like that's also around the age where more of the factors outside of just like society and diet culture and things like that played, as far as like 13 was around when I first experienced trauma. And even though I like wasn't consciously, I think, aware of it at the time, those behaviors did escalate more. And my parents, so they divorced when I was 16, but they were definitely like fighting a lot more then. And also my mom has had I guess like 3 surgeries now that she had when I believe I was 12, because it was actually right around when I started with the dance studio I had transitioned to. It was like a 16-hour long surgery that she had a spinal fusion for scoliosis. And my mom is also older. Like my mom had me when she was 40. I'm the youngest, and so was already a bit older, but she had really severe scoliosis, and so had this surgery. And my dad had been working a lot, but it very much was like I was having to do a lot of like parental things. And because I was so independent, and I don't think it was something where, like that it was intentional on my parents' part of like, oh, we're not going to pay attention to her or whatever. But it was more of like, because I was very independent, that it wasn't something compared to like, my brother like struggled more in school. He was diagnosed with OCD super young. Like he needed a lot more support to do well versus me. I didn't need that. Like I didn't need someone who was going to sit down with me with my homework. I was able to like, I always liked cooking. So like I was able to, or like it presented that I was able to like, if I needed to like make myself lunch or like pack myself, whatever.
Did that come natural to you, or did you internalize a message that I had, like, I need to, like, was perfectionism something that you do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it was chicken.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think it was something, I think there was an amount of it that was natural, just like my like personality type. And I think how I function as a human. And I think also is why, even though I wasn't diagnosed with OCD until this year, I think is also part of like that, like just like a very rigid personality type that I've like worked on over time. But I think that's just like always been a thing for me. And also just like being in a family of like high achieving people, that's another thing. And I think there were parts that were definitely, eventually I put more pressure on myself because I think because of me naturally like objectively being good at a lot of things when I was young, when it came to when I was older and wasn't as good at certain things, that was when more of the perfectionism was playing a role.
Well, I love that you just made that comparison, because one of the questions that kept popping up for me is when I asked you about take me back to like a period of your life where you were just so happy and full of joy and everything, and the first thing you said was the age you were, and then you mentioned dance.
Yeah.
And when I think about little kids and being so full of happiness around that love dance, it's fully for them about just the expression.
The freedom.
They see it and they love it. It lights them up internally, and it's just pure bliss for them, and creativity and expression. And when you go on the track of doing lessons and you continue and you get on teams and things like that, obviously you've got goals to improve, and you're competing, so therefore it's we got to see
there are
improvement.
Standards
You got to
here.
win.
It's not
There's
just I'm just doing this for fun, like dancing around in my basement.
Yeah. And so there's a certain point where it goes from this is so much fun, I love it, it lights me up, to I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I think, and this is me, I've never been a dancer. I would never claim to be one. You don't even want to see me try. But like, I'm looking at this from the outside from the like psychological perspective and emotional perspective. And I have to think that there's this transition of right, it being this fun, fulfilling thing. Not that it can't still be that, but like, then you've got the anxiety and stress of I've got to improve, I've got to this, I've got to that. And I almost wonder if there's like a little bit of a grief cycle that takes place when you have to let go of that part that is no longer the no rules, right? Yeah. Like, because when you first get into it, it's no rules. Yeah. You're just loving it. You're picking up, you're taking the curtain from like the side, and twirling with it or whatever, and a pillowcase, and that shifts. Yeah. And so the shift basically of the perfectionism standpoint. Yeah. And it being your personality. OCD, rarely do we see it just pop up from birth.
Oh, yeah.
Something happens.
Yeah.
When do you think that, I mean, because there's a little bit of that, I think, that has to be in place to be able to
like start.
Be successful at an eating disorder?
Oh, yeah. No, I think there's so much crossover.
I don't know if that language
there.
I just use is problematic.
I think there is so much crossover, especially like for me, like, of course, there's a whole spectrum of eating disorders. For me personally, struggled with anorexia and orthorexia. And with that, like often, and of course, like it looks different for everyone because not for even everybody with anorexia, like it's driven by perfectionism.
Can you explain orthorexia really quick for those who don't know?
Yeah. So orthorexia is this over obsession with like clean eating or perfect eating that it very much is from like kind of like a moral standpoint. And it goes beyond like, oh, I want to be aware of my health to like, oh, I can only eat XYZ foods that are clean. Like, and often like, cause with anorexia, there is like, of course, restriction is the predominant thing, but it's not always, oh, I'm only going to eat XYZ food groups. There are times where it's like, oh, I'll eat whatever foods, but only XYZ calories versus with orthorexia, it was like, I was obsessed with watching all the different like documentaries, like of like all the different like Food Inc. and things like that, which also some of that stemmed from like things I had to watch in high school and whatever, which is a whole thing in itself, but was very much looking at like, oh, well, like if I eat GMOs, whatever thing is going to happen, or like if I have added sugar, this is going to happen, or all these different things. And that stemmed, I think, after anorexia had started, that it was like that obsession went further. And with that, I think it just ties in that with OCD has very similar things with that rigidity. And I think it's interesting that I think from when I was young, definitely OCD tendencies there. I think some of them maybe weren't as obvious or as noticed because like I had mentioned, my brother, he was diagnosed with OCD when he was in 5th grade. And for him, it very much was something triggered it that he was in 5th grade when 9/11 happened and we were living in New York. And one of his friend's mom died, that she was in one of the Twin Towers. And so it was like right after that he developed it, and it was to where like he had some of the like stereotypical like hand washing things, but it was to the point where like he was like showering several times a day. He was like washing his hands for hours, but also one of the things that brought attention to it most was in school, he was erasing his paper to the point where there were holes in his paper because he thought if he made a mistake that my mom was going to die. Which I know a lot more of that now as an adult than I knew then. I mean, I knew when I was a kid, like, cause I think I was in preschool when 9/11 happened. So I was like 4. But I remember like, and I didn't really know much about it at the time, but we would like go to an office that now I know was like his psychiatrist and things like that. Wow. But I think it is something where, and this happens with so many things. So, and I think also for him, clearly OCD was super clinically significant to where it was completely interfering with his life versus for me. Sure, I think maybe some of those tendencies were present from when I was young, but honestly with OCD, like in itself, it wasn't until earlier this year that was something that was really noticed as a thing on its own. I think also because of, and I'm sure you know this from your own mental health journey, that as we work through certain conditions or like just different presenting issues, other things pop up like, oh, like not that like, and also I know that there are different viewpoints on recovery from all sorts of things, but particularly with eating disorders. Like some people are like, oh, I identify with the label of like fully recovered versus me. At like one point I thought that, but now I'm very much someone who, for myself personally, prefer like the like strong long-term recovery thing, because for some people, like, cause I think language is so important, and sure that there are people that if they identify with that label of fully recovered, that's amazing. For me, it felt more like another form of rigidity of like, oh, like I can't possibly, like the way I was defining it for myself, not necessarily how other people are defining it for themselves. But for me, when I wasn't having to constantly be working on eating disorder recovery, or even when I had done a lot of work around my PTSD recovery, and when I was doing stuff to manage my ADHD, because I was diagnosed with ADHD in September of 2021. So things like that the OCD was more prominent because it was like, oh, here are all these other things that I've like managed, and started seeing the ways it was presenting more. So that's also just been so interesting, especially as a therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that, what's problematic for me is the fully recovered language that implies, like, you know, and I will say, I think it's damaging if you say I'm fully recovered from anything, and don't follow it up with, but I understand that
if you don't like, or I have to constantly work on this.
Because
whatever.
Listen, I struggled with anorexia not orthorexia,
bulimia,
anorexia and anorexia athletica, the overexercise.
Yeah.
In my early 20s. And then after I can't remember what happened. I mean, like, I didn't go to therapy for it or anything, but
But how sometimes even without therapy, like, growth happens, life happens.
And I got back to a place where I was like loving my eating I knew that I was eating a healthy way and loving myself, and I wasn't struggling with restriction at all years.
Yeah.
But then it's come back a number of times in the past. Okay. So I think that in the grand scheme of things, none of us are beyond, right? Somebody could look at me and be like, yeah, Patrick, but you're a self-professed, addict, and that's in your makeup. Yeah. But, I think it's human nature.
Oh yeah.
That we reach to behaviors, substances, sometimes even our diagnoses.
Yeah.
In times of emotional distress.
Definitely.
And it causes imbalance. It causes isolation. It causes, so many different things. And so, to say, like, to imply that something we struggled with under the umbrella of mental health is in the past and done, I think you're only fooling yourself.
Yeah.
Use whatever language you want, but be honest with yourself about the fact that we always have to, if we want to stay healthy, stay in tune and aware, because our brains change. Oh yeah. When you hit 30, how old are you? 30?
I'm 27, almost 28.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry.
No,
I just
you're
aged
fine.
you. God, if you gave me 3 extra years on my birthday, I'd be so upset. But
hey, people always think I'm younger than I am, and not necessarily in a positive way. So
okay, fair enough. You're so wise. That's what. Yeah. No, but I think that if we don't pay attention to the fact that both the nurture, so like our environment, and the biological chemistry of our brain change as time goes on.
Oh yeah.
And so therefore our needs and what we reach to change.
Definitely.
In times, like I said, in times of distress. And so, I don't know. I think that we are only robbing ourselves and lying to ourselves if we say, I'm recovered, I'm fully recovered, I'm whatever. But I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
Talking about obsession. OCD, obsession compulsion. OCD and really eating disorder is rooted in a little bit of, I was saying this earlier, eating disorder is rooted in kind of like a little tentacle of OCD for it to work and survive. That is all rooted in anxiety and fear.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. What
was yours?
Yeah. I think So many, like looking at it now, it's interesting with the perspective I have now as an adult that I think there are so many fears and things in so many ways that I was using my eating disorder to cope, and even things now with my OCD in ways that that's used to cope. That I think there for sure has always been like this like feeling of being different, which I now know as an adult, that like with being both ADHD and autistic, was diagnosed autism back in February. And so knowing that like, and I think as humans, we're all different, but there is that difference in my neurotype, that my brain does operate differently than people who are neurotypical, and that definitely looking at things. And of course, like there are always kids are going to be shitty. That's just like how it is. And it's not necessarily, I mean, of course there are people from like when they're kids that they're shitty people, but there are also times like, I know there are so many things I look back on and I'm like, shit, I was mean for saying that, like things like that. But that there was like, I did always feel different and like felt like, I like needed to do something to maybe like, even with being different, for like people to have something they liked about me, or even like with my eating disorder.
Okay. So what did you feel more different, inside or outside?
I think it's a hard combo, but I think there was a lot of like the inside feeling of like, because from when I was super young, like my mom said I didn't have like struggles socially, but as I got like, I always, the thing is, the tricky thing with that is I always related more to adults. Like when we were at family parties and we're like, you know, family friends' houses, I would always want to sit like at the adult table versus like it was harder for me to interact with kids, which like, so it's just so interesting looking at that now. And so I think with that was a big piece. And like my eating disorder also, like, I mean, like so many things became an identity, but also because people were praising me and people were like, oh, because I like, of course, not everybody with an eating disorder loses weight, but I did lose a significant amount of weight. And especially with dance, that it was like, oh, like you look so good and you're getting these featured parts and all of this, that it became like, oh, I get this praise for this thing and people like me for this thing. Like I'm seen as desirable for this role because I'm looking this particular way, or people are like, oh, how are you doing this? And I would also like, even at that point, like I would still like, I would tell people things that I wasn't doing. Like I'd be like, so it's just this strive for, I think, connection too.
1000%. And that is exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
Because it looks like on the outside, the eating disorder started because of a need to be quote unquote skinny for dance. But to me, I'm like, no, there was something earlier and deeper. And if I were to like piece together what I heard you just say, it's purely that you didn't feel connected to people your own age. You felt connected to adults. You wanted to feel connection to people your age, and didn't have a map or a way to see that and make it happen. And when something presented itself for you to control the outside, and it provided you all the social affirmation, even though the inside still felt different.
But it still was this thing that made me think.
Yes, the outside like gave you it was like the key to unlocking the ability
to. It's like, oh, here's this thing that's giving me all this. And I think it's just so interesting how much it has evolved, which I know is the case with people with so many different challenges, but especially like, I would say like I didn't have like any like super early childhood trauma, but in my teen years, like definitely had a lot of trauma and things that like at the time didn't label as trauma and didn't get support around. Like I didn't start therapy until I was 19. But things, and like also like some of it like trauma within my family with my parents' divorce, and then some other.
Can I ask you, and we'll cut this out if you're not okay with it.
Yeah.
But can I ask you for some examples of what like during your teen years the trauma was that you didn't think was trauma?
Yeah. So I guess, and I'll let you know with these. There's one that I'm mostly comfortable with sharing. There's one that like I'm cool with sharing with you guys, but don't want like on the internet. No, I'm cool with sharing. Like it's stuff that I'm like cool with sharing it. But so the one that I'm like cool with sharing with the internets that I haven't really like shared, like a lot of people in my life know, but I don't think I've shared at all, honestly, on the internet, at least publicly before, was, which I guess this goes to like the dark parts of the internet, was when like, and I think this was pretty common, especially, and I think this is the thing why I didn't necessarily label it as trauma, or even why sometimes like haven't talked about it as much, but it was very much the age of like talking to people like on like AIM, or even like just like different like apps and things where you could like talk to people. And like there was a time, and like especially because I didn't connect with people in person as much, it was easier to talk to people online, and also was like a phase of time where I was like figuring out
even
who
those
I
of
was.
us who are, I'm raising my hand,
Yeah.
like the most extroverted extroverts.
Yeah.
Like,
well, then it can be easier to talk over like text and whatever.
It was the thing.
Oh, yeah.
It was all we could. If we were out doing something in real life, all we could think about is what messages am I missing on? Like, I got to get home and get on the dial up and get on AIM. You know.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's super
and I think
relatable.
with such a thing, and especially like at that time, and especially with me being so independent, also, but. And I honestly don't even remember the name of the app anymore, but had started talking to like this guy who I thought was 16, ends up, we'll get to the part where we find out that he is not, but had been like talking to him. I think I was like, I want to say I was like 13 or 14, but anyway, had been talking to him, and then like ended up like sending him nudes, and was thinking, oh, he's like this is like a sit, like still wouldn't have been great, but I was like, oh, this is a 16-year-old guy that I really like and I'm talking to and whatever, and was like figuring all that stuff out, especially because also like at that point, not that I feel like I had any like super overt negative messaging around sex from my parents. I didn't grow up super Catholic, and I'm now not religious, but there wasn't anything that they like said super overtly, unlike some, you know, families, but it was still like, it was something we didn't talk about, and there wasn't stuff talked about around that, and like, you know, responsibility around that. But anyway, it was when I was like 14, there was a time I came home and like, I think like over time I like stopped talking to the guy or whatever, but still like thought like, you know, and it wasn't like we had been like messaging on like AIM and email and whatever. Like we hadn't ever, especially because at that point, like FaceTime and stuff wasn't really as much. Like it was like just starting to become a thing. But and like, I guess like fell off like whatever communication. But then there was a time, and I'm pretty sure it was when I was 14. I think I was like a sophomore in high school, came home from school, and my brother said like, Mom, and my brother is older than me. And he said, he's like, Mom's coming home early. Like there was like someone who like came here earlier, like about something with you, and like she's coming home early, Dad's coming home early. And I was like, what? Like I think he said something about like something with the like computer like crime unit and something, and I was like trying to I'm like, what could this be? And was like freaking out. And then and so then I was like, so I was panicking, whatever. And then my mom, especially, I was like, shit, like Mom's coming home early from work, and like Dad's like, that's not like, it's not it's not good. And I also had never been in like trouble like that. Like the most trouble I'd had was like not handing in a homework assignment or something like that. But then ends up, so they like, you know, like parents, I think my mom got home.
What's the feeling for a perfectionist that doesn't get in trouble?
It was like just like gut, like, you know, like heart fell to my ass kind of feeling of like, also because I was like, what even like, because like I knew obviously that like I talked to people online, whatever, but I'm like, what did I even like do? I'm like, I don't think I did anything that was like me doing anything against the law or whatever, and was just like, I was like, oh, is this like something about a friend? Like I was just like very confused. And then so my mom got home before my dad, and I guess they only like really needed like one parent home or whatever, but then like these two like detectives come, and basically they end up like sharing that I guess like the guy I had been talking to was actually in his 30s, and it was part of this like whole ring of, I was the oldest out of the girls. It was like it was tons of girls from across the country, and the reason why it ended up being it wasn't even just like New York State. It was like the like I'm pretty sure it was like the FBI was like involved. It was like across state lines, and like ranging from like, I want to say as young as like 10. And it was this thing where like there was like one guy, like I think it might have actually been 3 of them. I'm trying to remember of like the like detectives and whatever, but I remember being at the kitchen table, and then like at one point one of them like went to the living room with my mom, and they were like, 2 of them were like just talking to me and like asking me all these questions, and like So there was that whole thing, but they also knew it was wild, which I mean makes sense with digital footprint, but they like knew everything about me. Like they had like my report card, they had all this stuff. I had like an Etsy shop at the time selling like hair bows for dancers and cheerleaders.
How old were you when it happened, and then how old were you when they came to the door?
I believe I was 13 when it happened, like 14 when they came to
So about a year
yeah.
apart. Okay.
And so, and they had all this stuff, and like they had like social media accounts and like all this stuff. And like they were very much towards me, at least like the like law enforcement people were like not judgmental, like they were very kind, but they were asking me all these questions. And like it started with like, before they even led with the whole like what it actually was, you know, they were asking like all these different things about me with school and like showing me all these things and being like, yes, this is you, right? Oh yeah. And then like shared that. And then I was like, you know, in my head, I was like, what the fuck? But then I'm also like, what I was more worried about was my parents. Like, obviously it's a shitty thing, but like, I was like, fuck, like, what is even, especially, I'm like, not that like, you know, like knowing, especially with my parents being a bit older and things with that. And also with me having this like perfect front, never having anything versus like, I have two brothers. I don't talk to my oldest brother, but he had a lot of issues growing up. And so it was always like, I was like the golden child. My oldest brother had a lot of his own mental health stuff and stuff going on. And then my other brother, who is the one who struggles with OCD, like he just had like needed support growing up, but it was very much like I was the one who like didn't need support, who didn't need like eyes on me and all of this. And
do you ever remember thinking like what would happen if you, because clearly there was that underlying fear, I've got to be this. This is what my identity is. Mom and dad need me to be this because my brothers are that. Did you ever process like, if I'm not this, what's going to happen?
I don't think I ever consciously did, but it was like in a moment like this where it was like, what is like, it was
the world
so
yeah,
exactly.
Apart.
Well, because also at that point, like, and given at least like when they were presenting all of it, like my mom was in the living room with one guy, my dad hadn't even gotten home yet, and I didn't even want to know it, because like, I mean, I have an interesting relationship with my dad that has evolved over time, like so many people. But at that point, like it was something where I was like, and not like he definitely like has never been abusive or anything like that, but is someone who like sometimes like many people like would like shout and things when he was angry. And not that I ever feared that he was going to hurt me or that there was any level of abuse in that way, but it was very much the like, oh shit, like what kind of like, I don't even know what being in this kind of trouble looks like. Like the trouble I know is like, I was like very emotional. My parents were like, go to your room or whatever. It wasn't like, oh, here is literally this like insane, like FBI, like this whole thing. And so I was really just worried more. Like, of course, like I was embarrassed when like they were like, you know, because the like cops like showed me like the like images that I had sent and videos and all of that. But I was like, oh, what's going on? I'm like with my parents, and I'm like, cool, like my brothers are now going. I'm like, what, like how, like what, I was supposed to like go to dance that night. Like I was like supposed to be like doing homework and whatever. And so then like, I don't remember all of it, but I know at one point, I want to say that they left before my dad got home. I can't remember for sure. But you know, and they were saying like, you know, there's going to be like, there's a whole like, you know, trial and everything that's happening. And like, I know that they gave like, I believe like we were given the option, like if we wanted to like take part in that as far as like actually like going for that. Cause I think Guy was maybe based in Kansas or something like that. And like we ended up like not participating like in that, but and like I remember that one of the cops did like give me a card that like had his info and was kind of the like, hey, like if you need anything, you know. But at that point, like I had never like, aside from like when I was a little kid, like seeing like my like going to my brother's like psychiatrist appointments, like didn't know like therapy wasn't something we like talked about or anything like that. So I wouldn't have even known like what is like he even meaning by that. But then I remember my like, you know, my dad had gotten home and we were like having like, we basically had this like sit down in my living room. And I remember the way my childhood living room was laid out at the time was like we had like a big like two like big windows, and in front of that was a couch, and then we had a piano like parallel to that piano bench, and then we had another couch this way, and then we had our TV this way. And I remember I was sitting on the couch, and everybody else was like on the other side of the room. And at the time I was still talking to my oldest brother that I don't talk to now, but it was all of like, it wasn't just me and my parents. It was like me, my brothers, and my parents. And it's a whole thing. And I'm just here like also trying to process all of this. And then it was very much not a like, oh, we're so sorry this happened to you. Like, are you okay? It was very much like, what did you do?
You remember experiencing identifiable shame?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I feel like aside from, or at least, I mean, I feel like I had shame around my like body in the terms of eating disorder, but in this way of like this intense of a like, I feel like character.
Sorry, I mean, I think
I think like more of like character
incident, like
shame.
something that you did, not like, because I guess I feel like there's a little bit of a difference between like, I feel shame for something like about a part of me that is versus I feel shame about this thing that happened.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
And I felt like this was more of a like attack on character type of shame.
To be faced with for a perfectionist kid, which is so interesting to me that your family dynamic was the youngest had to be the golden child because typically it's the oldest. And but for the perfectionist golden child, your first time experiencing situational shame like that, being an incident like this, like,
no, it was so much. And also that it very much like it was the like, what did you do? Like, this is like, how could you do this? Like, it was very much blame. It wasn't like oh shit, like you thought you were talking to a 16-year-old. This was actually a guy who was like 35 or something and has collected all these photos from like girls all across the country. And it was very much like you did this thing, like you're bad. Like I remember like something like I remember like, and there's been like at least there's been some amount of work in our family done around this. There definitely is like more that needs to be. And it's one of those things that to an extent is kind of like, I wouldn't say totally brushed under the rug, but just something like, especially because it's so many years ago and that I've done a lot of my own healing around it. And my mom also, like I've done some work with my mom around it. Not as much my dad, but have done some and like with my, one of my brothers and whatever. But
so the sit down was,
the sit down was very much like, this is like, why did you do this?
Why did you do this?
And like, I also at the point, like at that time, like I hadn't even like done more, like in person, hadn't done more than like kiss a boy. Like I had one boyfriend, but like my like dad was like asking all these things as far as like, like if I had sex with someone or like all of these things. And like my mom was like, would you want to know like if I sent nudes to whoever? And like it was just also like it was just a lot of like the whole like it was my fault. And I think also like of course like I don't want to even I'm not a parent, but I don't even like I'm sure there was so much going through their brains and trying to make sense of that. And also because it was very different generationally with technology for
that, and you're their only daughter,
that it's a thing, and I'm the only daughter. So it is just very like I think different because with them, I mean, like my parents were born in the 50s. So like internet, like it was very much like that wasn't how they were using the internet. And so I can understand like
that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense for them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But
it's not your responsibility as a child.
Especially at like 14 years old to have to manage that. No. And so, and I think it was also hard for me because like I knew plenty of things that were like going on with my brothers and whatever that I'm like obviously like, yes, like that was a thing. But like, I feel like now, like, and in that moment I felt like, oh yeah, like I did like something wrong. Like
no
I did
wonder
bad.
When I ask you about like, what trauma did you experience that you didn't feel? Of course you didn't look at this as a trauma because you're looking at it as something you did.
That I did. That was something that
you were bad.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was a whole thing. And like after that, like my parents and like for sure, I think looking at it, I'm like, yeah, like there probably should have been more awareness around what I was doing on the internet and whatever, but it very much became not like after that, like there were a lot more rules around it, but it wasn't in a like, oh, we want to like protect you. It was like a, we don't want you to do something else thing of like I had to like give them my phone at night. And like, I was like things lost. Like all of that and like lost that privacy. And it was like, no, now we can like look through all of your stuff and whatever. And like, sure, like maybe from the start there should have been more parameters around it, which also it was like also new at that point because it was like, it was just, such a different realm as all of that was evolving. But
how did your stuff change at that point? Did it?
Yeah. So I think like looking at it now, I mean, it was also so hard because I wasn't like sharing that with like people in my day-to-day life. It was like I missed dance that night, but wasn't being like, oh yeah, like I missed dance because I had this whole thing that happened. And like, luckily, I will say I was able to keep dancing mostly because I was competing. It was like with my parents, it was like, hey, okay, this isn't just going to like, if we take dance away, it's going to be like, we've paid all this money and also it's like this whole team. Like it's not just like this one thing. But it also like around that time, like I think definitely like eating disorder stuff had escalated more. I also just like my level of anxiety was so much higher because I was also feeling like, oh, I'm just like, I mean, I just had this huge, like, massive bombshell of, like, you know, trust thing being violated there and, like, world being shattered. That also, that my parents, like, being so aware when they really had very much, like, it had been that I was able to be very independent and, like, didn't have my parents' eyes on me. And then it was suddenly their eyes on me constantly. And just like there was like, and also there were so many reminders of it for so long because we would over like every, you know, few weeks we would be getting different things like as like the trial progressed and whatever that we were like getting letters in the mail.
So it was absolute reminders of
all the time. Yeah, like that we would get something in the mail, of like the Department of Justice and being like, hey, like XYZ thing is happening on XYZ date if you would like to, you know, testify or whatever. And so it was constantly.
How did that make you feel every time?
Oh, it was like I was just every time I would see that because there were plenty of times like I would get home, you know, and I would take the mail in or someone or whatever, like, and I would see that and I would be like, fuck, like now there's just going to be like, I was just waiting for like, I just wanted it to be
but how did you
that
feel?
Reminder. Oh, it was like fear of what my parents were going to say because I was like, cool, here's another like thing that we can't have this just like go away. So that fear continued there. And so that was just like, and continues, like, I think it's something where I've found like I did a lot of like trauma work in therapy around that. And so I feel a lot more resolved. Like, of course, it's still something that's so shitty. And I'm like, wish that never would have happened. And also wish my parents' reaction would have been different. Given I'm very grateful that like, especially with my mom, we've done a lot of work around that and that she has apologized and all of that. And, but with that was like a whole thing. And I think also it's like hard, but kind of goes to the power of like the positive power of the internet in a way. And I say positive loosely, but like, unfortunately, there are like so many friends I have now that are like, oh yeah, I also had like, not that it wasn't something for them that it was like found out and there was like a lawsuit around it, but that they were also having like similar things happening, whether it was that they were aware that it was someone who was older or not, but that was just like a thing. And like, I know like still continues to be a thing, but especially in that like 2010s like era, that was just like something that like happen. And also because there were just like, I feel like the actual like legalities around things online were also just very different.
Yeah, they had it.
Then and like so easier to get around things and all that. Cause sure, there were some laws, but it was so much easier to bypass it versus now it's a lot harder to do that.
Did you start to have intrusive thoughts?
I honestly like can't consciously remember now. I do know that I was just like constantly anxious. And also it was hard because I was like, cool, I'm like trying to like get my schoolwork done and stuff now. And I think and so it was just all of that and not wanting it to impact that. So I think I was just like even more like heads down into schoolwork and just like doing everything I could to be perfect in every other realm because here's this big thing like that I fucked up doing this, even though that wasn't like, looking at it now objectively, like wasn't that I did like something bad. But yeah.
That happened to you.
Yeah.
That happened to you.
Yeah. So it's just so interesting now looking at it as, and also like even like working as a therapist now with teens and things like that too, that it's just like, I think it's like sad, unfortunately, how common it is. And also like makes me, and I think it's so like, I think it's also really hard to balance that as a therapist too, like times where, because like, of course I'm not like my like clients' parents by any means. And also that's not like my responsibility to be making sure that like they're using like the internet in a healthy way or whatever. But there are times and like, of course it's something that I have to balance because not that I would like ever like, especially with a teen client, like share like that or like that part of that, but it's something of having to balance of like also wanting to be like, hey, if like someone's mentioning this concerning thing, wanting to like not in a like parent way of like, oh, don't do that, but of the like, hey, like, let's look out. What are the potential risks of this thing? And I think it's hard that I think luckily because I've done so much work around it, like so many other things, I'm able to approach it in a way that's not like coming from like my own pain or even coming at it in a way that's not therapeutic or not healthy, but it is always so, I feel like I'm more on guard with seeing that with, I mean, adult clients too, but especially teen clients because the internet really is like the Wild West.
So true. When did your eating disorder start to cause physical problems for you?
Yeah. So later in high school, because I also, when I was 16, after my parents divorced, I changed to dance studios again because I got even more serious. And initially thought I wanted to like purely do like just ballet, not competitive dance, doing a bunch of styles. Like I had done some summer intensives and was like really loving ballet and was like really skilled. Like I was skilled with other styles too, but that was very much my thing. And especially because of being very perfectionistic, and ballet is a very perfectionistic thing. And there is like, in many ways, like a right or a wrong with different things. And I like very much attached to that. And then I ended up realizing that like I wanted serious ballet, but I also wanted to still be able to do other styles. So I found a studio where I was able to do that and all that. But it was as I got more serious about ballet specifically, even though I was still doing other styles, I realized even though at that point, like I definitely had lost weight, like my body had changed, but it was even more apparent, like because ballet is just like a whole other animal on that front. That like, that's when it was like even more severe. And I also was dancing a lot more hours. Like, I mean, I was like, you know, would be in school and then would get home and from like 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. was like at the dance studio. And so, and also because at that point, like it was when my parents had divorced. So there was like, and I was living with my mom and she was working a ton to try to like continue making ends meet. And she was like in school to get her master's and all this stuff. And so she was trusting me to either, you know, make my lunch or like would give me money to get lunch at school, but obviously wasn't seeing what was happening there. And then similarly with dinner, it was like, you know, I would have something like when I was like coming home and like there were times still where she like made dinners for us and I would eat or whatever. But I remember like there were like times where I was literally like when I was heating my dinner up in the microwave when I would get home from dance was like, and this was after having several hours of dancing, I was like doing jumping jacks like in front of the microwave, like all of these things. And I was like tracking all of my food. And so I also, that's when I started like being more tired and lightheaded and things. And there's still at that point was never like anything like that other people, like everybody else just still praised it. Like there wasn't like concerns around like, oh, are you being healthy or are you not? Because it was like, oh, like you're just getting like, and since I had been in a slightly larger body as a kid, it was like, oh, well, like you want to do ballet professionally, you want to dance professionally, this is the body you have to have for this, and you're working towards that. So cool. And like clearly if you're able to dance for however many hours and you're still getting straight A's in school, like you must be like doing okay. Like we see that you're eating at different points, so you must be fine. I would say like the only time there was ever like any concern like externally, like at least as a teenager medically, was I was diagnosed with celiac disease when I was 18 because I had been having all of these really weird symptoms, including like I wasn't having as much of the traditional GI symptoms, but I was having these like rashes that were going from like head to toe. And when we found out it was gluten, and I stopped eating gluten, which also I had already been not eating a lot of things. But when I stopped eating gluten, I lost even more weight. And that was the only time that it was something that was like something I wasn't controlling.
Yeah.
That was creating those symptoms. And so I mentioned it to my doctor and was like, hey, like I noticed, you know, since being gluten-free that I've lost more weight. And he was like, oh, like sometimes that happens, like it'll even out, like you're fine. So in that point I was like, oh, well, clearly I'm like fine if like if even this doctor is saying like you're losing weight, it's not a problem. And so it kind of like that's just how it can like continue there.
So did it get worse? Your symptoms?
Yeah, so it continued, especially because I just like continued losing weight and was continuing to be Just more tired. And it was like where I was never struggling and like, well, there were times that I wasn't like great with math, but for the most part, like I was still like, I wasn't like failing any classes or anything, but was very much also where like in my mind, it was like dance and like food, my body, and school were the only things. Like I wasn't like, and also like time wise, dance did take up a lot of time, but I wasn't like, aside from friends that I had from dance, like wasn't hanging out with people like outside of school, like, and all of that. So it was very much that I had like very like isolated myself.
Your world
and those
had
were
gotten
exactly
small.
really small. And those were the only things I was caring about.
Reflection.
Yeah.
When this all started, you were seeking connection and to expand your world. And isn't it so interesting?
Oh yeah, that it just
how
like shrunk it.
the opposite is what ends up happening as time goes on.
Oh yeah. No, it's like seeing that. And I think that is with so many things, like so many medicating behaviors, that's often like we think it's going to do the one thing and it does the opposite, but we still think it's doing that thing because I mean, like
we have that illusion. It's because
yeah.
we get it's just like drugs or alcohol. Like for me, you know, no matter how bad it got, I have this illusion in my head. What is it? The euphoric recall.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like I remember the good that it did at either the very beginning or the early stages.
Yeah,
and it's
the times when it was working.
Yes. And like, it's this illusion that I'm not doing something right to get back there. Like I can get back there. It's possible. I've just been doing something wrong.
Yeah.
You know? And it's crazy because that's 100% delusion. And so what brought you forward to a place of something impeding the symptoms and the behavior to where you started to make changes?
Yeah. So, you know, went to college, started college as a dance major, and was still very much in my eating disorder then. But then the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college, my childhood best friend, and I didn't know this until I was a bit older, but that she had been in and out of treatment for anorexia when we were in high school. And so she would like fall off the face of the earth occasionally. And I didn't really know what was happening. And like my mom apparently knew, but I didn't. But then that summer, she's a year younger than me and she was turning 18. And we went, me and a group of her friends, we were going into Manhattan to, we were taking a trapeze class. We were going to dinner and then we were going to see Kinky Boots on Broadway. And I didn't know until later that night that aside from like two of her cousins, all of her other friends, there were people she had met in treatment. And so we were like, I remember it was like the limo ride on the way home. That's when I realized that they were friends she had met in treatment because they were all talking about that. And also they had been talking about like that one of the friends that was there, they were really worried about and she hadn't really been eating that much and whatever. And I think she had left separately because I want to say she had been living in the city, but they were talking about that. And they were talking about all these different things. And I was like, oh, they are talking about how they had to like go to the hospital and go to treatment for these things that I like do every day. But was still in my mind, I was still like, oh, well, like no one's forcing me to like go to treatment. So like, clearly like it must be fine for me. But that was the first time that it really in my head was like, maybe there's something here. And that whole summer was like basically the summer before I created the Instagram account I have now, the summer before I started therapy, and was still like very much, it was, I would say like one of still the lowest points of my eating disorder because I was very much like, I was like going to the gym twice a day. I was like restricting so much and was also still, my world was also super small because I was like also like modeling a ton that summer. So that was all I was caring about was like being desirable for modeling jobs and all of that. But then that's also that summer when I started seeing more recovery oriented content, and like more things around positive body image and healthier relationships with food on social media. And in particular, one of the accounts that I had started following, and it was like, it's so interesting because I was still very much not in the space of thinking, oh, I have an eating disorder necessarily, but an awesome eating disorder nonprofit, Project Heal, that they've shifted over time, but their goal has always been like expanding access to treatment for eating disorders. But they had and still have like Instagram, and was like, they were like posting different things about eating disorders and recovery and all of that. And seeing their post was one of the things that like made me be like, okay, yeah, I think this is a problem. And then I like really got to the point, especially with starting the new school year, that I was like, I am so anxious all the time. Like I'm doing all this stuff. Like I'm going into this new school year and it's like school is harder now. And like, what do I do? And so then started looking into therapists, looking into seeing like, cause I knew what insurance I had. I didn't know like how my parents were going to feel about therapy, but I was like looking at all that, did all the research, and they ended up like agreeing. Like I still wasn't like really telling them, oh, I think I have an eating disorder or whatever. I'm pretty sure I said to them, I'm like, oh, I think I just like have some anxiety or whatever. And so they were like open to paying that. And then like really that's like when I started that Instagram account, and kind of like it's been definitely a winding journey with many like lapses and slips and relapses over time. But that was like that summer was when things like actually like when I started.
Can I stop
recovery.
you for a second?
Yeah.
I didn't know how my parents were going to feel about therapy. I didn't know how my parents were going to feel about me going to therapy.
Yeah.
What would you say to a young woman the age you were today if they were to say that to you?
Yeah. It's a hard one. I mean, I think I would say like, of course, like this isn't me saying like, oh, you shouldn't care at all what your parents think or whatever. But I think knowing like, even if they think negatively about that, that also reflects on them, and seeking therapy should be ultimately about you and your healing. And knowing that like also part of therapy can be like, if your parents have negative feelings about you going to therapy, that's so much of what comes up in sessions with clients. But I think that also was something that I think has been so healing in my family now, because like my parents had like, I know my mom had like done like, I think had briefly done some therapy at one point, but I was really the person who started like really consistently doing that work. And over time had a few times where I had sessions with my parents, and then they each individually have done their own therapy. And like my brother is back in therapy, and like my mom, I think she like meets with her therapist like weekly or every other week now, and like is on like meds and like
Good
all
for
of
her.
it that like we, and I think it's something where like any family, there's still so much like
There is
growth that needs to happen, and it's not perfect. But I think also with me becoming a therapist, that was another thing that was like tricky. And I think there have been times where like that has like, I think earlier on like rubbed things wrong, but now is something where it is viewed as like something that we do talk about more. Like we actually have conversations, at least with me, my mom, and my brother have conversations around that more of like when things are harder, or like, oh, hey, I think I like need to go back to whatever, or like, even was like really open with my mom, like when I was getting testing for autism, that like it's not required as an adult to have someone who knew you really well when you were a kid be part of that, but it is highly recommended. Yeah. And I still I wasn't totally sure how she would feel about that specifically at first, especially because she had been a little bit skeptical about the ADHD thing, but she ended up like, you know, filled that out. And also like afterwards I like sent her the report because I was like, she's a nurse, like she'll find this interesting. And that she did, like it was something where it was very affirming. And like even like at my like I had said, I got married 3 weeks ago and had some like really healing moments there.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, but like there was a point with my dad like where, because we had a really big fight a few months ago, that there's but he had said to me at one point, he was like, I want you to know that like it's never bad to show your emotions. It's all part of love, which hearing him say that was like a really big thing. And like, there's still like so much complexity there, but hearing
am I wrong in that I feel like you said something about receiving messages either overt or covert when you were younger that,
oh yeah, emotions are bad. Like we don't do that. And so now having that, I think it is something that, while it's still a work in progress, is beautiful that we have made that progress as a family. And of course, like there's still work to be done there, but being able to have moments like that, while also not being like, oh, I had this moment, so suddenly we're all wonderful. But I think times like that have been even more healing, because I think I'm in a place with myself, like regardless of like how my family feels about like me and what I do at any point. Like I feel really secure in that and have like so many other supports, but it does feel really great when I was like, oh, we were able to have these wonderful moments, or when I'm able to have like, when I feel like I'm being able to be open about like my feelings. And even with that, like having him say that, because part of like the huge fight we had a few months ago was because I had expressed negative feelings I was having, and there was a whole really strong negative reaction. But then when I had that moment, I was like, see, like this is why, like, this is why it's really important and powerful to do these things, even when you may get a really strong negative reaction. Because sure, there are times where people, whether it's with their family, their friends, their partner, whatever, that maybe you express something and then there is never a resolution there. But I think there is the potential for it. And that I have seen those changes over time happen with my family, and even having it where it's like, oh, like I said that thing that had a really negative reaction at the time, but then we had this healing moment.
Well, I think, and the goal's got to be that expressing and the work, like what you do, what I do in any given moment to like express or say what I feel like I need to say, or do the work that I feel like I need to do, is for the resolution internally in me. The bonus is the bonus gift is if that ever happens and there's reconciliation with the other person. And how beautiful that you got to receive that, and that you're continuing to see, you know, reach milestones with your family members.
Exactly. No, and I think, I want
to ask you, sorry, because we're almost out of time. I feel like I could talk to you for hours more. And, but you know, you have been so open and vulnerable about so much of just what makes you, well, your neurodivergence, that's the right word, correct? And honestly, the things that make you special. I mean that in a good way. Oh my gosh.
No, I know what you mean.
We might need to cut that.
The internet, I know what you mean, but the internet may.
Oh my God. But the thing, like, I love so much about you. Your personality is just it's beautiful and so unique in all the best ways, and you're using it as a tool to, like I said at the very beginning, to change the world. And I like to watch your followers connect with you is like, it's beautiful thing. Thank you. All your stuff is going to be below. If you're tuning in, it's down below. Please connect with Colleen. And, you know, the last question that I always like to close with is for that person. And I say person because I think that so much of the time our audience members, to me, the most important audience member we have is the one that feels so alone and they think they're the only one watching or listening.
Yeah.
To that person, and they've identified with your story, what word of encouragement would you like to leave with them?
Yeah. I think to know that no matter, and I feel like this is very cliche, that no matter how dark and hard things are right now, I can't promise how that will look in the future, but I know that it is possible for things to improve. And I don't mean that in the just like things get better way, but like you're able to build this life that you right now maybe you're not able to see, or maybe you've built things and it feels like, oh shit, everything has fallen apart. What happened? But knowing that like you are able to find happiness again. You're able to find purpose and passion. And even if it doesn't feel like that right now, and I know I have had so many of those moments, like I want you to know that that is something. And of course it takes a lot of work and there's so many layers, but I never would have imagined like that this is where I'd be right now. And so just like want you to know that no matter what you're going through right now, and it might be that this season that's really hard may still be going on for a bit, but you're able to build like a life that is different than what you can imagine. You're able to find this healing that truly feels lasting. That's not just like, oh, I'm putting a smile on my face because everybody says like, I need to not feel this way. That like, also it's okay. However much time it takes, it's okay for it to look different than what other people think. It doesn't have to look like this textbook thing. Doesn't even have to look like what your therapist is saying it has to look like or anyone else. It's about you, and you have the ability to like rebuild or continue building the life that's like what you want to live and what feels best for you.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you.
This has been such an awesome conversation.
So grateful.
I'm grateful for you, and grateful for each of you that have tuned in today. You are absolutely needed here in this world, and I hope you feel that from the bottom of my heart. Remember that it's never too late to start loving yourself, and that you're always only one decision away from a completely different life.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.